Good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue A Prophet in Babylon, Chapter 7, The Ghostly Dawn. Of all hours that carry alarm to the human soul, there is no hour so full of the significance of fear as that grey interval which follows the first breath of dawn. Not the night, for we understand its meaning, and know how to welcome its silences after a day's loud tumult. The true ghostly hour, before which the soul shrinks, is not the hour when the world falls asleep, but when it awakes. For then the atmosphere is pregnant with presences. The dead, it may be, hurrying back to the house of dust before the cock crows. Angels withdrawing from the chambers where they have watched the dying themselves, with their last flight accomplished, gliding out with fearful feet upon long roads that lie among the stars. Then, too, all familiar shapes are clothed in vagueness, and appear strange and menacing. The tall houses are mere pillars of gloom. The windows, where no human face appears, are as sealed eyes, made blind by tragic visions which are secret and unspoken. The very streets, empty of their eager life, loom spectral. The trees are as hooded nuns, clothed in grey, and the world draws long shuddering breaths, and sighing fills the air, and echoes of the secular strifes of men whose very memories are forgotten. It is this element of uncertainty which makes the hour dreadful, the uncertain light, the shapes and sounds, and the sense that with the slow growth of light there must come some revelation so new and strange that the soul at once desires and shrinks from it. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. The veriest skeptic might believe that record. Anything may happen in the ghostly dawn, when the mists melt upon the silent sea, and the strangest thing of all may happen, that Jesus stands beside us, and we do not know him. It was so that Gaunt felt in those weeks which followed the events already narrated. He stood in a spectral world where everything seemed unreal. His whole past life appeared an error, a nullity. It had crumbled beneath his feet and disappeared. The things which had loomed large in that life melted into nothingness, and a vague new world began to build itself around him. Amid those shadows he groped slowly, at first more conscious of a lost world than of a world newborn. Ever since that memorable Sunday when he had broken with tradition, he had been aware of a great change in himself. The values of life had altered. He was no longer anxious to please men, nor careful of his reputation. He had never been so in any narrow or unworthy sense, but as he surveyed his past life, he saw that these had often been the guiding motives of his conduct. He had been a man conscious of a great position and of the influence which was attached to it. But now self-consciousness was dead in him. He knew men talked much of him, and not kindly, but he was not careful to know what they said. He was as one who treads a high mountain path alone, hearing no more than a babble of voices in the village at his feet. In all his public addresses he had hitherto cared much for the literary form. He knew the fine phrases in his sermons, was subtly conscious of their value and of their effect on others, and had waited for that effect. Perhaps his phrases were not less felicious now, but he was unconscious of them. He spoke out of the fullness of his heart, conscious only of the burden of his message. For men like Roberts, whom he had once despised, he felt now only soft commiseration. He saw them as men imprisoned in a narrow life, men to be pitied rather than blamed. His manner towards them was singularly gentle, and although they often sought to provoke him, he had no angry words for them. The earliest effect of this change of temper was a decision renouncing his salary, which Palmer had made to the deacons at the meeting. "You can do nothing for men until you have convinced them that you are disinterested," Palmer had said to him. "The chief hindrance to the church is that men do not believe its ministers disinterested." "I am not disinterested," he replied. "Certainly you are, according to the conventional standards," Palmer had replied. I know, and a few other people know, that a man of your ability might have done well in any profession, and have reaped far greater worldly rewards. But that is not the point. The mass of men judge not by what is, but by what seems. They see you living a comfortable life, well paid, and according to their own standards even extravagantly paid, for what appears an easy exercise of ability. They do not unnaturally suppose that complete honesty of mind is not possible in such a position. They regard your calling as a profession. You do something which you are paid to do. It does not in the least matter that their estimate is unjust and ignorant. They think these things. Consequently, they keep away from the church, and if they hear you at any time, do so with suspicion of your motives. You can never overcome prejudices of this kind, Gaunt replied sadly. Cannot you? My dear friend, you have forgotten your history. Why, history is full of the splendid stories of men who have cast away their supports, giving up everything for an idea. And as I read history, that has been the supreme secret of the success of people like Francis of Assisi and John Wesley and of Booth. The world reveres its martyrs, whomsoever else it may despise. But Palmer, I am not one of these. I am only a weak man struggling toward the light. And what more were they? Great men at last. Yes, but weak men once. Oh, I know how you think and feel. You are a victim to that enabling adoration of great men, which is so common today. You adore them as exceptions to the rule of life. You ought to think of them as examples, and to say what man has done and been, man can still do and be. No, no, Palmer, I might think in this way of other people, but never of myself. Well then, I will set you an easier task, said Palmer. Let us forget all about great men, and simply look to ourselves. Do you see this one thing to be true, that your power over men, and anyone's power, will be in the direct ratio to the conviction men have of their disinterestedness? Yes, I see that. And do you realize that you are just entering on a path which can only be pursued by constant self-renunciation? Do you realize that what the world is always seeking, and for the most part in vain, is living examples of what self-renunciation means, and that Christianity can only regain its authority by the influence of such lives? Oh, I see it, Gaunt answered passionately. I have seen it for a long time, but have been afraid to admit it. I can't read the Gospels without feeling their reproach for a life like mine. I can't come into contact with poor people without realizing the essential falseness of my position. And I feel it most of all in the pulpit. I am a tame prophet. I am bound by a chain of gold. The angel with the fire of coal hovers just above me, but I cannot reach out to him. Sometimes I hardly wish to. I fear the pain. Touch the flame, said Palmer softly, and it will melt the chain as well as scorch the lips. It was Palmer's way to put a thing in phrase, and to leave the truth so uttered to do its own work. He had that rarest art of moral surgery, to know exactly how far the knife should go, at what point to stop. During all the years of his friendship with Gaunt, he had been quietly studying his friend's nature with a growing belief in its immense but latent spiritual possibilities. He had never intruded his advice. Often he had purposely offered it in an ironical, even humorous form. He had always had some dim foreshadowing of the coming crisis in Gaunt's life, and so he was prepared for it, and knew precisely how to act. And now that he saw the soul struggling to be born, he knew the way that it must travel, the method of its deliverance and triumph. It was the old way of self-renunciation. There was no other. Can these things be? Gaunt had pondered through the long sleepless night which had followed his talk with his friend. Can I let the old life go, the well-ordered, comfortable life, of ascertained duties and desires, for this new life whose path seemed so vague, so perilous? The ghostly dawn weighed upon him, and yet amid all the fear and trouble of that hour, he was conscious, as it were, of someone who greatly loosened his fingers as they clung to the world, unlocked them one by one in quiet mastery, so that the baubles of pride and worldliness for which he had fought fell from his grasp, and fell unregarded. The practical issue of these emotions was the message which Palmer had given to the deacons. Gaunt realized that he must be free, and he dared be poor in order that he might be free. Henceforth he would take nothing from the world that should be a bribe or even a possible menace to his own spiritual freedom. It may seem a small step, perhaps, to those who have never taken it, to those who have never had enough of the world to feel its loss, to those who have never known the satisfaction of a life which has been fed with praise, and have never eaten the rough crusts of blame. But to a man of Gaunt's nature, inherently proud and accustomed to the material rewards of success, it meant much. It implied a reversal of all customary thoughts, an entire change of attitude toward the world. The vagueness and fear of the ghostly dawn was also with him in other ways, practically in relation to his thoughts about religion. And we'll stop there for today. That's the end of Chapter 7, Part A. Next week we'll pick up with Chapter 7, Part B. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.